classified as a second felony offender, offense aggravated burglary, forcible rape. Sentencing date December 16, 2008. Sentence to 20 years DOC. Parole date is June 14, 2022. Good time, not eligible. Full term, June 14, 2025. Is this information correct, sir?
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Mr. Roche.
Thank you very much, Ms. Teresa. Good morning, Mr. Vargas.
Good morning, sir.
Good. I'm going to ask you some questions, and you just answer yes or no, okay?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Vargas, you're currently, 51 years old?
Yes, sir.
And you've been incarcerated for 16 years, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And this is your second felony offender, and you also have an immigration detainer on file, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
I see where you've been arrested in 4 different states, Florida, Louisiana, Ohio, and Nevada. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And I see where you are enrolled in sex offender treatment and you were removed from that program because of excessive absences. Is that correct?
Yes,
por las violaciones que tuviste por no haber seguido el programa del que tú estabas metido, que tú no habías ido.
no, sí.
Yes.
Okay, so you have not completed sex offender treatment.
Correct.
And I see where you've been, that you were removed from the Drug Dealer Anonymous and Living in Balance at your request.
Saliste de ese curso.
Sí.
Yes.
So basically the reason why we incarcerate an individual is to rehabilitate that individual, and that's done through programming, and you have not completed the necessary programs in order to complete your rehabilitation. Am I correct?
Sí.
Yes, sir. ¿Le puedes decir algo?
So you also have law enforcement opposition. You also have opposition from the victim who adamantly opposes, and you have opposition from the DA's office, which he will state during this hearing. So basically, you don't have what it would take me to vote for you to, unless I hear something to the contrary, I'm not going to be able to vote for you today. You understand?
Muchas oposiciones que si quieres decir algo.
Yo quiero entrar al programa otra vez.
He would love to re-entry to the programs again.
Okay. And when he does, he can write back.
Cuando entres otra vez al programa.
Mr. Chairman?
Thank you, Mr. Roche. Ms. Teresa, I think we have a couple of speakers.
Yes, sir. We will first hear from Ms. Denisa Rodriguez, who's the ex-wife.
Ms. Rodriguez, if you will unmute your microphone and tell us what it is you'd like for the board to hear.
I would like for him to be given the opportunity to be released. He has been given the runaround being in there because of his misunderstanding of the English language.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for your comments. Ms. Teresa?
Yes, sir. And we also have Mr. Randy Meyer, Jefferson ADA, who will be speaking in opposition.
Good morning, Mr. Meyer. How are you?
Doing great. How y'all doing?
Just fine. Thank you.
Randy Meyer, Assistant DA, Jefferson Parish. We have a very strong opposition to Mr. Vargas. The facts in this case are horrible. He struck a lady in the face, beat her, raped her, then fled to Florida. He's done this before. He's got a conviction in Nevada for battery with a deadly weapon and domestic violence. He has another domestic violence conviction. I mistakenly had 50 years in my letter. It's only 20 years sentence. The judge felt it was sufficiently serious and that he was such a threat that he ordered the sentence to be served without benefit of parole. He's been lucky to have the legislature make some changes to make him eligible for parole. We think that is not a good thing in this particular case. The victim is very distraught when she learned of his parole application. She sent a letter, which I didn't see in your file, so I had her daughter send to me yesterday, and I'll forward it to y'all.
Mr. Myers, we do have the letter.
Okay, thank you. And the daughter was participating this morning, but it took so long for the hearing to come up. She had to get off. She was at work, doing it at work. We're very concerned with the fact that excessive absences had him removed from sex offender class. Very concerned that at his own request, and for whatever reason, but it was at his own request, he was removed from the Drug Dealer Anonymous and the Living in Balance. Clearly, I think he is not sufficiently rehabilitated, and we would be very, very strongly opposed to his parole. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer.
Yeah,
Mr. Vargas, is there anything you'd like to say to the board before we vote?
yo me siento mal por todo el daño que cometí.
Sí.
Le doy una disculpa a la víctima, porque sé
He's really heartbroken. Also, he feels sorry about the victims
todo el daño que le hice a él, a su familia, a mi familia también.
for what being hurt all his family, all the feeling on his family.
La familia de la víctima es la víctima.
Mhm.
Lo que te estoy diciendo. Yo me siento mal porque
He really feels sorry about all the consequences that he's caused through these crimes,
malas decisiones,
for all his bad decisions that he's been
todo
taking.
trae consecuencias en la vida.
He's been
Yeah.
bringing a lot of consequence in his, for this.
Y por eso cuando yo aprendí allá adentro que malas decisiones traen consecuencias.
He's been learning a lot at DCI. He's also been telling me about, that he's been taking, hobby class, the hobby. He's been taking some of those classes, as well as, he's been helping a lot of security over here working. He also mentioned to me that, that he has not had any write-ups in the last 3 years.
No, fue 2017.
Since 2017, he has not had any write-ups. So he would like to have a chance,
Estoy tratando de regresar al programa.
He also, try, and
Terminar mi programa.
he also is trying to go back to take his finish all the programs, all the classes, the 2 classes that he dropped previously. I think he said he's gonna continue, trying to apply for, for those classes to get re-entry and go to the right direction.
Yo sé el dolor que le causó a la víctima. Yo me siento mal por todo el dolor que le
For
causó
all
a la
the-
víctima.
For all the pains that he caused, he feels sorry to the victims.
Porque tengo que cargar con ese problema por el resto de mi vida.
Because he has to carry this until, for a long time. Yes.
I think Mr. Marabella might be frozen. Are you?
No,
Mhm.
okay.
Okay.
Okay, is the panel ready to vote?
Yes.
Mr. Roche?
For the interpreter, I will stop and pause and give you a chance to translate to Mr. Vargas at intervals, okay?
Yes, yes, sir.
Mr. Vargas, based
sir.
upon victim who's adamantly opposed law enforcement opposition and opposition from the DA's office,
Del district attorney. Okay. Por las oposiciones que ha habido en el district attorney.
and your removal from the sex offender treatment program for excessive absences
Tantas veces que te saliste de clases. Yes, sir.
in light of other rehabilitative programs, excessive criminal history, and a history of violence, I'm going to deny your request today.
Thank you, Mr. Roche. Ms.
Yo, gracias.
Wise?
Una oportunidad.
He still wanna offer, thank you for the opportunity today.
Well, we appreciate his comments. Now we're voting, and we'll let him know what the vote is as soon as we're done. Ms. Wise?
Thank you.
My vote is the same for the same reasons.
Thank you, Ms. Wise. My vote likewise is the same for the same reasons. Mr. Vargas, I appreciate the fact that you're willing to go back and take those programs. You need those programs. You have to have those programs to get it done. I think you need to also take some victim awareness programs to make sure that you understand what your crime has done to the people that you have offended. Good luck to you.
Thank you.
Can you even believe it? He's got 4 different states that he's committed crimes in. He has a detainer. So Ohio, Nevada, Florida, and New Orleans. It's just disturbing. And the idea that the judge only gave 20 years, even thinking it was just that he wouldn't have eligibility for parole, it's still like, well, why not give this guy life? And then you have his enabling wife shaking her head and saying, it's like, oh, ex-wife. It's like, give me a break. You want to go take the cell next to him? Go for it. Give me a break. Language. Thank goodness Randy showed up. You know, I like Randy. He shows up to everything. Now, we'll go over the facts of this case. But what's disturbing, now the math I calculated, he got a 20-year sentence, and this happened in 2006. So he's going to get out in 3 years. I know Richard put in the notes, and thank you, Richard, for providing all the facts, that it's 2045 good time date, but I don't think that's right. I think it's 2026 because of the 20-year sentence and the time of the crime. But preliminary examinations were held October 19, 2006. At this time, the victim stated that she met the defendant at a party sometime in February of 2005. They dated for about 2.5 months. Shortly after they started dating, the defendant began to ask the victim to marry him. Wow. 2.5 months. To which she responded, maybe. However, the victim ended the relationship because she felt he was not a suitable partner. I wonder why she felt that way. The victim explained that the defendant would follow her around and always impulse his presence, even when she wanted to be alone. She further testified that when she ended the relationship, she told him that she wanted nothing more to do with him, to which the defendant responded, no, because he wanted to marry her on May 26, 2005, which was her birthday. It's actually quite smart, right? You get married on the birthday. It's just one day that you have to celebrate. Yeah, this guy's, he's got. Okay, obviously that was a joke. On that note, that was actually kind of funny when Mr. O'Shea said, Mr. Mirabella's frozen, but he wasn't frozen. He was just in like a perfect image. Like, the victim again instructed the defendant that the relationship was over because he continued to contact her at work, and he would talk about her and say that she was a bad person. After the victim ended the relationship, the defendant would continue to contact her. He brought her flowers to work to get her to change her mind. Additionally, he would call her at work. Can you imagine you date someone for 2.5 months, then they want to marry you immediately, and when you say no, they start stalking you? So he would call her work, he would call her cell phone, he would leave numerous harassing messages. She then expressed that the defendant would leave messages on her phone calling her a disgraceful B word, not worth anything. When the victim asked the defendant to stop calling her, he ignored her request and continued to call. Initially, the victim did not call the police about the harassment. However, she did call the police on May of 2005. When the defendant met her unannounced at the airport, whoa, that's scary, where the victim was returning from visiting her mother in Guatemala. She did not notify the defendant about her travel plans. However, the departure and return dates were written down in her calendar at home. Wow, that is scary. The defendant broke into her house and retrieved the information. The victim returned home. She found her bathroom on the second floor dirty, and the victim's neighbor informed the victim that she heard noises in the apartment but was afraid to enter. At the airport, the defendant began accosting the victim, pulling her arm, insulting her, telling her she was disgraceful and that she had to leave with him because he needed to speak with her. Security personnel noticed the situation. The victim testified through an interpreter, it says, and escorted the victim safely to her brother, who picked her up and instructed her to call the police. How terrifying. When the victim arrived at home, she observed the defendant driving around her block. She called the police and her neighbor, who assisted her in explaining the incident to the police because she did not speak English well enough. When the policeman arrived on the scene, the defendant was not in the area. However, he started calling her on the phone instead. At that time, the police officers instructed the victim to change her locks and to call again if she saw the defendant near or if he began to harass her again. I mean, what else could they do? Maybe they could have said file a restraining order. They could have helped her through that process. I don't know. Not that it would have made a difference. There's not a lot that you can do to stop stalkers. It's kind of like a black hole, my understanding. On separate occasion, also in May of 2005, the victim's friend and neighbor called the police because the defendant chased the victim in her vehicle when the victim was leaving work. She observed the defendant in his vehicle at the corner of Taco Bell. The defendant chased behind the victim in his vehicle, and she became very nervous. She drove around to the back of her house where the defendant hit her vehicle. The defendant hit her vehicle. The victim called her friend, who came outside. As the victim turned the corner, the defendant hit her vehicle for a second time. The defendant then began banging on the windows of her vehicle while he was saying that she was disgraceful, she was bewitched, and he was going to kill her. When her friend called the police, the defendant left. One of the policemen arrived on the scene was the same officer who was called out the first time the victim called the police. This officer called the defendant on his cell phone and told him that he needed to stop following the victim. Well, good for him for doing that. and that he wanted to talk to the defendant. The defendant told the police that he had done nothing. The police officer took pictures of the damage to the victim's car and left the scene. The defendant continued to harass the victim. Specifically, he threw rocks at her windows and her 8-year-old daughter. She had an 8-year-old daughter through all this. Her 8-year-old daughter got so scared she started crying and hid underneath the table. You know, it's like, what a The victim testified that she did not call the police because the young men in the neighborhood vowed to protect her. The defendant would call her and accuse her of having sexual relationships with the men, and that was the reason why they were protecting her. On that particular day, one of the young men came outside and the defendant left. The victim further testified that the defendant continued to watch her, and he would let her know he was watching her by calling and telling her who she was talking to on the phone or what she was doing at that particular time. And this all started because she dated him for 2.5 months. On June 2nd, 2005, the victim was working at Maria's hair salon, and the defendant called her at work around 11 a.m. The victim's co-worker told the defendant that she was not here, so he hung up and called back around 1 p.m. The victim's co-worker again told the defendant that she was not there, but included that she would come back because she left her car there, reasoning that the defendant may have been outside watching the victim. The victim left the salon at approximately 3:40 p.m. The victim went straight to the home because she was afraid of the defendant following her. When she got home, she locked her doors with the double lock, also using the chain. When she turned around, she observed it. Oh my God. Oh my God, what a nightmare. When she turned around, she observed the defendant in the middle of her kitchen. She comes in her house, she locks the doors, puts the chain on. She turns around and she observes the defendant in the middle of her kitchen. It doesn't get scarier than that. So she asks him what he was doing there. The defendant grabbed the victim by her hair, began insulting her and hitting her. The victim started screaming, knowing the owner of the apartment was there because her neighbor had moved out. The defendant then turned on the television very loudly so no one could hear the altercation. The defendant then put a pillow over the victim's face to choke her as he said, "Die, you disgraceful woman, die." The defendant then began to drag the victim to the second floor. The victim refused, so he then attempted to lock her in the first floor bathroom. The victim struggled with the defendant as he continued to hit her. He then told her to take her clothes off, to which she said no. The defendant pulled out a knife from the back of his pants and told the victim that he was going to kill her and disfigure her face. Next, the defendant took the victim into the kitchen, threw her on the floor, and ripped her clothes off. The defendant bit the victim on. He bit her down there, opened his pants, and began to assault her. He told her not to move or make a sound, or he would kill her. The defendant was interrupted when the victim's son. The defendant was interrupted when the victim's son and ex-husband knocked on the door. The victim convinced the defendant to let her answer the door to give her son a key, promising that she would return to him in the kitchen. She put her clothes on, opened all the locks, and started yelling that the defendant wanted to kill her. Can you imagine that he believed her? The defendant left the knife on the kitchen counter and ran out the back door, hopping over a fence. She got so lucky that her ex-husband and son came there. I don't know why they didn't try him for attempted murder and just put him away for life. The victim's ex-husband observed him and chased him to no avail. The defendant stole her passport, green card, pictures, jewelry, and money. The victim's ex-husband called the police, and after they arrived, the defendant started calling the victim again. Can you imagine? One of the police talked to the defendant and told him to give himself up, to which the defendant replied that he did not do anything to the victim. According to the police reports, the defendant contacted a friend who drove him to Miami, Florida. The defendant was arrested in Miami when the police there learned of the warrant in Jefferson Parish. The defendant was extradited from Miami to Jefferson Parish, and the defendant was arrested and He continued to call the victim and also wrote her a letter from prison. What a psychopath, just a complete psychopath. He asked the victim for her forgiveness for what he did, explaining that he had already asked God to forgive him. Good for you. This is one of, I mean, just to unpack that, she's like dates this guy for 2.5 months. He says, I want to marry you on your birthday. She says, I'll think about it, which was a huge mistake. Although I'm not, who knew, you're going to put up, she probably didn't know what to say. You know what, you can say no. And he goes crazy and does all, it's just, and it escalated so quickly. And there was nothing she could do. The trial. So what happened here? The defendant counsel asserts that after a detailed review of the record, she could not find no non-frivolous issues to raise on appeal. In her brief appellate counsel notes that there is no ruling of the trial court to be challenged because the defendant pled guilty and it was not Crosby's plea. Additionally, counsel considered raising an issue regarding excessive sentence. Okay. She concluded the defendant was informed of his sentence in his guilty plea form, that the trial court informed, because he basically filed a, what was the reason again for what his appeal was? So jury selection began, but prior to jury selection, defense counsel moved the trial court to squash the indictment, arguing that the 2-year time limit for institution for prosecution had expired. The trial court immediately denied the defense motion to quash assertion. That part of the reason for the delay was due to the defense counsel's request. Right. So because you have to have the right to a speedy trial for 2 years, they said you didn't pass that. They said, come on, you're the one that requested that you want a continuance. So there goes that appeal, because they wanted evidence from Miami. On December 16, 2008, after opening arguments, so they picked the jury, they had the opening arguments. Count 1 of the bill was amended in accordance with the plea, and they moved to a plea agreement. And they amended it to forcible at the time that he withdrew his not guilty plea and pled guilty. On the same day, the defendant was sentenced to 20 years. So once he pled guilty, 20 years consecution as amended, and to run concurrent with each of the other with a 6-month misdemeanor sentence, which the defendant also pled guilty. The defendant filed an application for post-conviction relief. Maybe this is what Richard meant by the 40-year sentence, and also what Randy thought. But but they also mentioned 20 years, so I'm quite confused. The defendant filed an application for post-conviction relief. The trial court dismissed the defendant's application while granting his request for an out-of-time appeal, and this out-of-time appeal follows. I still don't get what his appeal is. The defendant understood the state agreed to file a multiple offender bill. Oh, see, look at that. They were going to file a multiple offender deal, which they should have done. Informed of his sentence to plea. Moreover, the defendant understood that the state agreed to not to file a multiple offender bill, and it also reduced count 1 to forcible sexual assault in exchange for the plea. I don't know, instead of aggravated. The counsel noted that the sentencing range for the amended charge was 5 to 40 years for forcible. Therefore, she concluded that 20-year sentence was not constitutionally excessive. No, it was just a 20-year sentence. I would have just said throw the book at him. You can't let. And the thing is that he has a retainer. He's going to get out in 3 years. They're going to deport him. And what's that mean? I mean, come on. They're not. We all know he's just going to be right back here if he wants to be. So watch out, whichever state he decides to show up to in 3 years. We have no reason to feel safe. It's quite disturbing. It's very disturbing. I mean, he'll be out in 3 years. So again, it's the DA is kicking the ball. I mean, Randy did a great job showing up, but they're just kicking the ball down the road. I mean, 20 years feels like a long time, but it's not when this man who's still quite young, he's 53 years old. And he's dangerous. Can you imagine being this woman knowing that he's going to get out in 3 years? The fear that she's going to have to live in? That's terrifying. Really is. You can't, I mean, how can you go to sleep at night? The idea that she came home, locked 3 locks, turned around, and he's standing there for then that trauma to begin. And here it is. He got just a 20-year sentence. You can't make it up. They should never have signed that deal with him. It's just not protecting your constituency, but they did. For some reason, they felt even the trial had started. They already went through the work of picking a jury. They already went through day 1. What makes them decide to take that deal? They really thought they couldn't get a guilty verdict? Is there something I don't know? Did the police not properly collect the evidence? Did the detectives? I mean, there's so much there, so much proof that any reasonable jury would say guilty. And they already went through the work of selecting a jury and started. How long was the trial going to go? A day? 2 days? You don't just see it through? Was the first day of the trial, did something go so wrong that they felt they had to take a guilty to accept the plea? I don't know. I've seen it before. I have it on my second channel where we have seen courts go a couple days and then they take the guilty plea because some things aren't looking like they're going so well for the prosecution. Maybe that's what happened here. I don't know. We won't know. But with that, I'll let you go.